I just kind of want to start with a bird's eye view of what's happening right now. We are talking so much about the trio, Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, and the real challenges of trying to rapidly vaccinate millions of people. Has the U.S. ever seen or done anything like this before?
Certainly not in my lifetime.
No.
Today, as the production of COVID-19 vaccines is finally kicking into high gear, we're talking with two vaccination experts about the challenges ahead.
Nobody is vaccinated. So it's like a sports car, like you have to go 0 to 60 in a few seconds.
Some people are calling this the greatest public health effort of our generation. So no, I've never seen anything like this.
Coming up, we'll talk cold storage, pharmacy deserts, conspiracy theories, hotlines, and why, no, you cannot ditch the mask and start partying quite yet. This is Nova Now, where it's our job to give the news a little booster shot of science every couple weeks. I'm Alok Patel. I want to start by talking through three of the most promising vaccine candidates in the order that they're likely to roll out.
Yeah, so I can talk about the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines because we've really been focused on them. And I know a little bit about AstraZeneca, which might be coming a little later.
Claire Hannon is the executive director of the Association of Immunization Managers,
or AIM.
They're a nonprofit that helps to share information among state and local health officials who are on the front lines of vaccination efforts in the U.S.
Our members are all throughout the country working on immunization, and they don't necessarily know how others are getting through these challenges, so we connect the dots for them.
Now, the two vaccine candidates we've been hearing about from Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna may be battling each other for news headlines, but actually they have a lot in common. They both use the same basic technology.
It's a messenger RNA platform, so the concept is the same.
Basically, each vaccine contains a biological code in the form of an RNA molecule. That molecule is a blueprint for building a piece of the coronavirus, one of the little spikes that sticks off of it. And this should teach your immune system how to recognize and defend against the real virus if it ever gets in your body. Tell me that isn't awesome.
They both require 2 doses.
The schedule of that double dose is pretty similar as well.
The Pfizer is 21 days apart. The Moderna is 28 days apart.
And based on early data, they both seem to be about 95% effective, which is really good. Better than the vaccine developers were expecting, actually.
Where they differ is really in the storage and handling, which complicates the logistics. So the Pfizer vaccine requires ultra-cold storage, minus 70 degrees Celsius, a concept that, most of us have never even thought of or contemplated.
I'm one of those.
Yeah, right?
By the way, minus 70 Celsius is minus 94 Fahrenheit. The reason the vaccine has to be kept so cold is that RNA is inherently unstable, and it breaks down quickly at room temperature or even in a refrigerator.
It's only stable at refrigerator temperatures for 5 days. So once we get it thawed, it's got to be used in the 5 days. And when you go to administer it, it has to be mixed. It has to be diluted. So that's really important to consider too. It's not something we haven't done before, but it's not something generally we do with vaccines.
Okay, wow. So given the complexity involved and the fact that this vaccine could be shipping out this month, I think it's time for what the cool kids call a proper unboxing.
Okay, it's the new.
Today we are unboxing the brand new PlayStation 5. Today we're going to be unboxing some iPhone.
So today I'm actually going to be unboxing every single PS5.
Hey subscribers, so today we'll be unboxing Pfizer and BioNTech's brand new mRNA-based vaccine candidate, BNT162b2. And no unboxing is complete without ASMR sound effects. The tinkling sound of vaccinology.
A hospital or provider, if they're getting the Pfizer vaccine, would actually get 3 different shipments.
3 boxes, even better. Okay, Claire, lay it on me.
So they would get what's called a thermal shipper box. It has what they call a pizza tray in it with the 195 vials. On top of that pizza tray is the dry ice.
To keep the vials super cold.
And in the top part of the box, there's a digital data logger. So they're going to open the box. They're going to check the digital data logger, make sure that, the cold chain has been maintained.
Meaning the vaccine never got above minus 94 degrees Fahrenheit during its journey. Okay, on to box number 2.
They're separately going to get a box that comes with the supplies for vaccinating. They will get the PPE, syringes, all the supplies they need to do the vaccinating. With the Pfizer vaccine, they're going to get a third box, which comes with the gloves to take out the dry ice, to handle the dry ice.
I love that sound.
And they will get the dilution kit as well. So to dilute the vaccine, they get a large syringe that they mix it in. They pull the vaccine out and the dilution out. And they're supposed to not shake it, but stir it. And then from that, they're going to draw into 5 syringes the actual doses. So it's quite a lengthy checklist, actually, of what they're getting.
I mean, just hearing you describe what's in the box intimidated me if I were to get that box right now and look at it.
And now you know why we can't just ship these boxes with instruction flyer in it. We actually need to train people. And we need to have a hotline so that they can call. And, they don't just leave the vaccine sitting out on the dock because they can't figure out the instructions.
And for Claire and many others, this is a real point of concern, especially given how much money the U.S. government has spent on developing a number of coronavirus vaccines.
We invested $10 billion in the production of this vaccine, and there's only been $340 million spread to state and local public health agencies. This is not enough for a vaccine campaign of this size.
Because even though Pfizer is handling the distribution of all these vaccination kits, it'll ultimately fall to those local agencies to enlist and train the actual healthcare providers who will be getting needles into arms.
This takes time, and these providers have to be vetted, they have to be trained, and we want to make sure we get all of this right.
Claire raised one other concern specific to the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine.
The packaging is 975 doses.
And if you were doing the math earlier, which I know you all were, the thermal shipper comes with at least 195 vials, and each vial is diluted into 5 doses. Third grade math, that's how we get to 975.
That really presents challenges for rural communities and smaller providers because they don't have that volume of being able to store that many doses, and they don't have that patient population of that many people getting the vaccine.
That means you'd have to split a single kit among multiple healthcare providers while still keeping all those vials at the right temperature.
And now you're looking at really cold chain challenges, and you've got to meticulously manage that. So that's the Pfizer vaccine, really challenging logistically.
All right, on to Moderna.
Then the Moderna vaccine is a little more simple. It ships frozen.
Roughly the same temperature as your home freezer.
It does not ship with dry ice, so that's much easier there. And once you've thawed out, it's viable for 30 days. So you have a longer window to use it.
Long story short, the Moderna vaccine is more stable than the Pfizer version. Plus, the Moderna vaccine does not have to be diluted.
And then it comes in packaging of 100-dose vials. So it's a little bit more manageable. You can spread it out across geographic areas a little easier to smaller providers, to pharmacies, where they would have the storage capacity, a regular freezer to store it, and they'd be able to use it in that 30-day window.
If we look ahead now to some of the other vaccine candidates out there, from companies like AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, or CanSino Biologics, many of those could be even easier to distribute and deliver because they use a totally different technology. Instead of directly injecting you with RNA, these vaccines use a delivery tool known as a viral vector to safely introduce a genetic blueprint into your cells. Let's take the AstraZeneca vaccine, for example. It can be shipped out at refrigerator temperature, and it's way cheaper than the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines.
So it's good to see that's progressing as well. But we don't have a lot of details on it because we're really focused on the ones that are likely to come out sooner in the next couple of weeks or so.
In fact, AstraZeneca has faced some really tough questions about the data it reported last month, which could ultimately delay its approval. So for now, the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines are leading the pack here in the US. Both have already applied for emergency use authorization from the FDA, which brings us to another important question. Who gets vaccinated first?
The added complexity of this program is that we have a nuanced priority scheme.
Dr. Saad Omer is the director of the Yale Institute for Global Health.
In terms of my own research, I'm an infectious disease epidemiologist with a specific focus on vaccines.
Which is why when the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine created those guidelines for distributing the COVID-19 vaccine, Saad was part of the committee.
There were epidemiologists, vaccinologists, economists, communication experts, bioethicists, etc.
Together, they created a plan that works in phases.
Phase 1A is healthcare workers and first responders. Phase 1B is people with really high impact comorbidities and folks who are living in nursing homes.
Comorbidities could mean cancer, hypertension, heart disease, kidney disease, severe obesity, anything that puts someone at a greater risk of severe complications from the virus.
So the strategy is designed, and I'm also part of the WHO committee that created the roadmap for the rest of the world as well. And the idea is the same. Go directly after mortality before transmission.
In other words, focus first on the people who are most likely to die from the virus rather than the people who are most likely to spread the virus. Then, gradually widen that circle. So phase 2 will include teachers, childcare providers, and other essential workers, as well as older adults and people living in prisons, group homes, or shelters. And finally, phase 3 and 4 will open up the vaccine program to all remaining adults and children. And it's important to note, the vaccine will be free for all Americans. Terms and conditions may apply. Please see your local provider for more additional details. It all depends on policy and how things go, but we really hope it will be free. I can't believe I did that in one take.
And then as vaccine doses become available, you start building enough number of vaccinees that you are starting to interrupt transmission.
This is how we achieve the fabled, legendary herd immunity, when enough people have been vaccinated that the virus can no longer spread.
So if this approach is followed, you may see a reduction in deaths well before a reduction in cases.
But this whole plan depends on being able to actually identify those people who are at the greatest risk.
There are a lot of disparities in this country, inequities in diagnosis. So people in communities of color have substantial underdiagnosis and differential underdiagnosis of their comorbidities. So there's a risk that we're going to miss those who fall in phase 1B or phase 2 of the priority schemes, etc.
I'm glad you brought up the issue of inequity. You know this better than most. We have seen inequity when it comes to access to care, preventative care, health literacy, being able to get health insurance. And we're seeing it kind of glare its ugly face at us during this pandemic when we look at which communities are hit harder than others. Do you think we're going to be able to solve this for vaccine distribution? Do you think we're going to be able to bridge the gap and make sure that everyone has equal access, or are you skeptical?
My nightmare is that we may end up worsening the inequity in protection if we don't make an active effort. For example, nursing homes that get the vaccine early versus late. It could be different if you don't make an effort by socioeconomic status. A society has to decide that it is unacceptable that our fellow citizens are deprived of life-saving vaccines just because where they live and what their demographic background is, whether they live in an urban pharmacy desert. So we identify that concept that in the context of flu vaccines, that just like they're food deserts, we have pharmacy deserts and vaccine deserts where accessibility is worse. And these are not just urban communities, they're Native American reservations, but also other rural communities, etc., that have access issues. And one thing as part of the National Academy's report we recommended is that within each priority group, you make sure that you use this social vulnerability index, which is a CDC index. It has approximately 14 variables, such as proportion, elderly, transportation access, income, race, ethnicity, etc., and other variables that put you at risk. So you calculate that, and then you make sure, if you're a health department, that those groups and those locations are not left out in your immunization program. So it's not like sort of taking a refrigerated truck from the Army Corps of Engineers and sort of, putting on ice cream truck music and going to a street and saying, come get your vaccine. It will have to be active. It just can't be passive.
Still to come, how effective is a vaccine, really, if not everyone wants to take it? We talk trust and also timing of when most Americans can look forward to that shot in the arm. Dr. Umar, what about trust? And I bring that up because, I'm just going to guess that you've gotten maybe one or two angry messages in your day.
That comes with the territory. I have an email folder, which I called fan mail. And I do get a steady stream of emails of a certain kind. If you put mom and apple pie in a vaccine, they would even refuse that. So there's this group of...
I want a mom and apple pie vaccine.
Exactly. Don't we all? But the thing is, that's not the group that we are really concerned about. There is a group that is genuinely concerned, and the initial concern is not unfounded. I'll tell you why. A lot of it came from the fact, look, the Operation Warp Speed objectively has done a good job of sort of nurturing a vaccine development program. But they should have taken a different name than Warp Speed. That created unintentionally a perception that things are being sped up unduly, which wasn't the case, by the way, because they found efficiencies in the process. The second thing was that there was a lot of political documented interference from the White House to speed up vaccination based on the election calendar. So based on that, there was this underlying mistrust. What has changed over the past, even before the election, there was substantial pushback from FDA, initially by the career employees, but also they actually got backing from political appointees. And they pushed back against the White House interference. So that is happening, but that hasn't been communicated.
And just like with distribution and diagnosis, there are disparities in that communication.
How do you bridge that gap, and how do you do it at the national level? So we know from science, from communication science, what works in terms of enhancing trust. We know that it's perception of competence, it's perception of the fact that someone has your interest at heart. The third thing is that how similar they are to you, not just sort of ethnically, but also do they share your experience in life, etc. So the approach I've been proposing is to pair physicians, quote unquote, experts, with community validators like church leaders.
According to Saad, bringing together that combination of medical expertise and community trust is crucial for widespread acceptance of the vaccine, especially in communities of color.
So that model scaled up at the national level. There's a concept of elite endorsers. It's not people with butlers endorsing. It's essentially people with specific characteristics. We actually ran a couple of experiments, and I paired up with our colleagues in political science. And turns out, Dr. Tony Fauci, if he endorses the vaccine, it will move a broad swath of society to trust it substantially more. It's not going to solve all problems, but it will have an impact. The other thing that would have an impact, we tried Speaker Pelosi and President Trump endorsing separately or together. If they endorse together, that also has an impact. So one way of being apolitical is to be bipartisan. Senator McConnell, Mitch McConnell, has a pretty strong history of supporting vaccines. He's a polio survivor. It's not a sort of a pipe dream to think that this can't happen. But the idea would be at the mass level to have bipartisan endorsement of the vaccine with prominent figures like Dr. Tony Fauci. And plus working with communities and so on and so forth.
It's worth noting, another thing public health officials and providers need to communicate is the potential side effects from these vaccines. Things like fever, headache, or swelling at the injection site. Based on preliminary data, this kind of response, something called reactogenicity, hasn't been super common in the clinical trials, but unpleasant side effects have been more common than with other vaccines people commonly get, like the annual flu vaccine. Pfizer found fatigue affected almost 4% of their participants and headache about 2%. In the Moderna trial, the numbers were higher. Fatigue in almost 10%, muscle pain in nearly 9%, joint pain in about 5%, and headache in 4.5%. Severe fever was documented by both Pfizer and Moderna, but in fewer than 2% of participants. Remember, if millions of people get vaccinated, which is the goal, then this could mean a lot of people with intense discomfort soon after getting their shots. And all these side effects usually resolve within a week, so don't fret, and they're a sign that your immune system is working. Still, it's important to be transparent and warn people that they may experience these side effects. So be prepared, don't freak out, they're expected, and let's be real, a couple days of side effects is way better than actually getting COVID-19. I have one last question. Assuming everything goes perfectly well in terms of finishing out the phase 3 trials, the emergency use authorizations, the buying and the distribution, which obviously that's a lot. I'm assuming right now that all of it goes perfectly well. What do you see in terms of the timeline and when we may see widespread vaccination?
It looks like we will have both Pfizer and Moderna, producing vaccine, perhaps 20 million or more doses a month.
Here again is Claire Hannon from the Association of Immunization Managers.
So, we may get the healthcare workers vaccinated in December and into January, and then work our way out to essential workers, those over 65. And then perhaps we would have other vaccine candidates getting authorized and coming online. So we could see 200 or 300 million doses by March. So I am hopeful that spring or May, we would have a really robust supply of vaccine, and it would be available to any American who wants it.
Everyone who doesn't have a medical contraindication should get the vaccine in this country, should have a right to getting a free COVID-19 vaccine, so that we reach a level of herd immunity where people can go to baseball games or Broadway plays or whatever.
What group activity are you most looking forward to when we return back to normal?
That's a really good question. I actually have a when this is over list to keep me sane that I started in spring. So I have thought about this. I'm looking forward to going to New York and watching a play. I'm looking forward to a jazz performance, a small, nice, and also catching a baseball game. It's the usual activities, being able to teach in a classroom, to be able to stand in the line at IKEA and be annoyed by the slow cashier that I somehow always seem to get. So the usual normal activities of life.
We can't jump on the train right yet. We have to be vigilant. But I do think a safe and effective vaccine is the silver bullet. I mean, we don't see polio, we don't see smallpox. This is what vaccines do. This vaccine will be doing its job if a year from now we don't have this virus in our lives.
And I absolutely look forward to Thanksgiving 2021. It better be a big feast. And it will be if we do this right.
Just yesterday, the United Kingdom became the first Western nation to formally approve a coronavirus vaccine when it gave emergency use authorization to the Pfizer-BioNTech candidate. Distribution will begin as soon as next week. Meanwhile, in the U.S., the CDC's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices has released its own guidance for vaccine distribution. According to those guidelines, which most states are likely to follow, the first Americans to receive a vaccine will be the country's roughly 21 million healthcare workers, including yours truly, as well as the 3 million people who live or work in long-term care facilities like nursing homes. According to Pfizer and Moderna's own estimates, there's enough vaccine for most of that top priority group to receive their first shot by the end of the year. So stay tuned, my arm is already ready. Nova Now is a production of GBH and PRX. It's produced by Ian Koss, Ari Daniel, Jocelyn Gonzalez, Isabel Hibbard, Christina Manin, and Sandra Lopez Monsalve. Julia Court and Chris Schmidt are the co-executive producers of Nova. Dante Graves is director of audience development. Sugi Bennett is senior digital editor. Robin Kazmer is science editor. Emma UK is research intern. And Nina Porzuki is managing producer of podcasts at GBH. Our widely accepted and distributed theme music, which gives you a shot of energy, is by DJ Kid Koala. And I'm Alok Patel. We'll be back in 2 weeks, which is more than enough time for you to read about all the other vaccines in development or testing. I mean, you've got Novavax, Janssen, Sanofi, Vaxart, Clover Biopharmaceuticals, Arcturus, Inovio, Genexine, Simvivo, CanSino, Merck, right there, Immunity Bio, City of Hope. There are so many shots on goal. Stay tuned, stay safe. The tingly sound of vaccinology. This is so creepy. I think I've scared everyone away.